Hey guys, tonight we are going to slow things way down. We're stepping into the smoky, quiet world of a Viking Age blacksmith. Feel the gentle, radiant heat from a banked fire on your face. Listen for the distant sound of lapping water at the fjord's edge and smell that unique mix of charcoal, hot metal, and damp earth. We're not forging a legendary sword for a king, or a gleaming silver hoard for a warlord. Our project is simpler, quieter, but in its own way, far more meaningful. We are going to forge a single, sturdy iron neck ring for a man who has just become free. It's a task that requires patience, skill, and a shocking amount of manual labor that, let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive without inventing Tylenol first. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always nice to see how far these little stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day's work is done. The last customer, a farmer needing his plowshare reforged, paid in cheese and promised a barrel of ale come harvest time. You've banked the fire in the stone hearth, its heart a dull, sleepy red glow beneath a blanket of ash. The air in your smithy is thick with the ghosts of the day it's labor, the sharp scent of cooled slag, the lingering memory of wood smoke, the metallic tang of iron dust that settles on every surface. Your tools hang in their proper places on the wall, their wooden handles dark and smooth from the grasp of your hands, their steel heads gleaming softly in the fading light that filters through the open doorway. This is your space, a place of noise and fire and violent transformation, now settled into a deep, peaceful quiet. As you wipe the grime from your hands with a damp rag, a figure appears silhouetted against the evening sky. He doesn't carry himself like a warrior or a chieftain. There's no swagger, no clanking of weapons or fine jewelry. He is a man of middling height, dressed in a simple but clean woolen tunic, his hands thick and calloused, but not with the particular burns and scars of a smith. He waits at the threshold, respectful of the boundary between the world and your workshop. You give a nod, an invitation to enter. He steps inside, his eyes taking a moment to adjust to the gloom. He tells you his name is Kettle. He says he is a lay singer. The word hangs in the air for a moment. A freedman. This is a well-known social station, a person who was once a thrall, an enslaved person, but has been granted their freedom. It's a mainstream historical fact that Viking society wasn't just lords and raiders. It was a complex structure of kings, chieftains, free farmers, tenants, and at the very bottom, the enslaved. Kittle now occupies that precarious space between bondage and full independence, still owing some allegiance to his former master, but the master of his own home. He gets to the point of his visit. He wants you to forge a neck ring for him. He says the word with a mix of reverence and nervousness. He quickly adds that he cannot afford silver, and he has no illusions of gold. He wants a ring of iron, plain, dark, honest iron. He gestures to a bundle he has carried with him. Unrolling it reveals his payment. A large smoked fish, a small sack of barley, and a coil of finely spun wool yarn dyed a deep, rich blue with woad. It's a good payment, a fair trade. This isn't a world of standardized currency for most daily transactions. It's the original bartering system, where a well-made tool is worth the food it helps to grow. It's a much more honest transaction than being paid in social media exposure anyway. You understand the request immediately. This ring isn't for adornment. It is a statement. A quirky but vital tidbit of the era is that for a newly freed man, the public act of wearing a ring, on his arm or around his neck, was a powerful symbol. It was a visual declaration to everyone he met. I am no longer property. I have the right to bear a weapon. I have the right to speak at the thing, the local assembly. Historians still argue whether the famous oath rings kept in temples were for swearing legal vows upon, or were just offerings to the gods. But for a man like Kettle, this personal ring is its own kind of sacred oath, a promise to himself to live as a free man. You discuss the design. He wants nothing ornate, no dragon heads, no complex wire inlays. He describes a simple, thick rod of iron, twisted in the middle for texture and strength, with plain, hooked ends to clasp it shut. He wants it to have weight. He wants to feel it on his collarbones, a constant reminder of what he has earned. You imagine it's a bit like a modern client asking for a minimalist, brutalist piece of architecture, but for their neck. You take a piece of charcoal from a bucket near the hearth and, on a smoothed piece of birch bark, you sketch the ring as he described it. A solid bar, tapering at the ends, with 3 distinct sections of twisting. He looks at the simple drawing, and a slow, genuine smile spreads across his face. He nods. That is it. That is the one. The deal is struck with a simple handshake, your grimy hand clasping his. Kettle gathers the empty cloth that held his payment and, with a final, grateful nod, he departs, leaving you alone once more in the encroaching dark. You look at the sketch, then at the cold, silent forge. You know the work ahead. This won't be a quick job. Iron isn't mined from mountains here. It must be won from the earth in a much stranger way. Your plans for a quiet week of mending your fishing nets just went up in smoke. Your journey to create this symbol of freedom will begin tomorrow. Not in the fire of the forge, but in the cool, damp silence of the bog. The next morning you rise before the sun. A thin, ethereal mist hangs over the fjord, muffling the world in a blanket of gray and quiet. The air is cool and smells of damp earth and salt. After a simple meal of oat porridge and a piece of yesterday's cheese, you gather what you need for the day's task. There is no hammer, no tongs, no tools of fire. Instead, you take a long ashwood staff with a sharpened iron point, a small wooden shovel, and a sturdy leather sack. Your destination today is not the forge, but the sprawling wetland a few miles inland, the place the old folk call the Mer, the bog. Your walk is a quiet one. You leave the small cluster of longhouses behind, your leather-soled shoes making soft impressions in the dewy path. The world awakens around you in slow motion. A raven calls from a high pine, its croak echoing in the stillness. You pass fields where early rising farmhands are already tending to livestock, their breath pluming in the chill air. The path becomes less defined, dissolving into a network of animal trails as you enter the woods that border the wetlands. The ground softens underfoot, the air growing thick with the scent of peat and decaying leaves. This is the unglamorous beginning of all your work, the foundation of your craft. You cannot forge iron without first finding it, and the earth does not give it up easily. Soon you are standing at the edge of the bog. It's a vast open expanse of stunted trees, hummocks of vibrant green sphagnum moss, and dark, tea-colored pools of still water. It is a place that feels ancient, alive in its own slow, quiet way. You know these lands well. You know where the ground is firm enough to hold your weight and where it will try to swallow you whole. This isn't a mine, with shafts and tunnels. Your quarry is a humble, lumpy thing known as bog iron. It is, in fact, the primary source of all the iron in this region. This mainstream historical fact is the reality of your work. The ore is not blasted from rock, but grown by the earth itself. Over countless seasons, iron dissolved in the groundwater filters into the acidic, oxygen-starved environment of the bog. Here, tiny bacteria do their silent work, causing the iron to precipitate out of the water and slowly form into rusty cauliflower-like nodules just beneath the surface. You begin the search. You use your staff not for support, but as a probe, a simple tool to feel what your eyes cannot see. You press it into the soft peat, feeling for a telltale resistance, a hardness that doesn't belong. It's a bit like a modern-day prospector using a metal detector, except your device is a pointy stick, and the only feedback is what you can feel through the vibrations in your hands. You walk slowly, methodically, your eyes scanning the ground for the subtle signs you've learned to recognize. A certain reddish-brown scum on the water, as surface, a particular type of vegetation that thrives in iron-rich soil. Bogs like this are potent places, full of folklore and a quiet, heavy power. A quirky local tidbit is the belief that these wetlands are a gateway to the other world, a place where the veil between realms is thin. People leave offerings in the dark water, and the preserved bodies of ancient sacrifices have been found, their skin tanned like leather by the bog's unique chemistry. You are not afraid, but you are respectful. You move with care, aware that you are a visitor in a place with its own old rules. You make a quiet, half-joking promise to any listening spirits that you read just here for a few lumps of rust, and have no plans to build a longhouse condominium. Historians still argue whether specific bogs were owned by a local chieftain or if they were a common resource, accessible to any free farmer or craftsman who needed them. Out here, in the silence and the mist, such questions of ownership seem absurd. The bog belongs to itself. You are simply here to ask for a small piece of it. After an hour of probing, you feel it. A solid thunk travels up the staff. Not the sharp crack of stone, but the dull, dense feel of an iron concretion. You kneel, the cold dampness of the moss seeping through the wool of your trousers. You lay your staff aside and roll up your sleeve. Plunging your arm into the icy brown water, you dig your fingers into the muck. Your hand closes around a lumpy, irregular shape. You pull, and with a wet sucking sound it comes free. You lift it out. It is a piece of bog iron ore, dripping with dark water and bits of peat. It's surprisingly light for its size, porous and brittle, the color of old blood and deep rust. It looks less like a source for a fine piece of jewelry and more like something you'd find at the bottom of a blocked drain. This is what you came for. You place the nodule carefully into your leather sack and continue your work. Probe, find, kneel, dig, pull. The sun climbs higher, burning off the last of the mist, but the air in the bog remains cool. The work is slow, repetitive, and peaceful. The only sounds are the squelch of the peat, the hum of insects, and the rhythm of your own breathing. Slowly, painstakingly, your sack grows heavier. When the sun is past its zenith, you decide you have enough. The sack is a dead, heavy weight on your shoulder as you begin the long walk back. Each step is an effort. Your back aches and your hands are stained and cold. You think of the finished neck ring, polished and dark, resting on the collarbones of the freedman, and then you look at the lumpy, dripping sack you carry. It's the ultimate how it started versus how it's going journey, with the going part involving a whole lot of fire, sweat, and hammering. You finally arrive back at your smithy as evening begins to settle. With a grunt of relief, you let the heavy sack of ore fall to the earthen floor. It lands with a dull, wet thud. The first raw ingredient has been gathered. But it is not yet iron. It is rust and earth and water. Tomorrow, you will begin the slow process of persuading it to become something more. The following day dawns clear and bright. You leave the roasted coffee of the future undiscovered and make do with a bowl of warm milk, sweetened with a drop of honey. The sack of bog iron sits on the floor of your smithy, a damp, earthy lump of potential. It smells faintly of the swamp, a wild scent that has no place within these walls of wood and smoke. Today's work is not one of dramatic sparks, but of quiet patience. It is the slow, essential task of purification by fire. You don't use your main forge for this. Its intense, concentrated heat would be too much. Instead, you work in a shallow, stone-lined pit just outside your workshop's main door. Here you can build a wide, slow-burning fire. You spend the first part of the morning preparing, spreading the wet, lumpy ore across the bottom of the pit. You take a heavy wooden mallet and methodically break up the larger pieces. The nodules crumble with a dull, earthy crunch, revealing layers of orange, brown, and yellow. It's a messy job, more like gardening than smithing. It's certainly the least glamorous part of the process, like being a master chef whose only ingredient is a pile of dirt clods and whose only instruction is cook until it is not mud anymore. Once the ore is spread in a relatively even layer, you build a fire over it. Not a roaring bonfire, but a carefully constructed lattice of dry branches and twigs. You want to coax the moisture out, not shock it. With a piece of flint and your steel striker, you shower sparks onto a small nest of dried moss and birch bark. A thin curl of smoke appears, and you gently blow it into a tiny flame. You feed the flame, letting it grow at its own pace until it has consumed the kindling and is licking at the larger branches. This process is called roasting, or calcination, and it's a critically important step. A mainstream historical fact is that this slow heating does several things at once. First, it drives off the vast amount of water held within the porous ore. You can see this happening as great clouds of steam hiss up from the pit. Then, as the temperature rises, the heat begins to burn away the organic impurities, the little bits of root, leaves, and ancient bacteria that are mixed in with the iron oxides. This purification makes the ore lighter, more concentrated, and far more effective in the smelt to come. You settle in for a long wait. Your job for the next several hours is simply to be a fire tender. You sit on a low stool, a long iron poker in your hand, your senses attuned to the fire's needs. The air fills with a succession of smells. First, the clean scent of burning wood, then the heavy, steamy smell of damp earth. As the ore heats further, a sharper, more acrid odor joins the mix, as the ancient peat and organic matter begin to smolder and burn. The smoke, which began as clean white steam, slowly darkens to a dirty gray. Every so often, you stand and use your poker to gently rake the embers and shift the ore beneath, ensuring every piece gets its share of the heat. There's a quiet superstition to this stage of the work, a quirky tidbit of folk wisdom passed down from your master. He told you that the iron has a spirit and this first fire is its awakening. It is good luck, he said, to speak to it, to tell it what it is to become. You feel a little foolish, but you quietly hum an old working song, your voice a low drone beneath the crackle of the flames. It's less about superstition and more about passing the time. You've already mentally reorganized your entire tool rack twice over, and the fire is only halfway through its work. Historians still argue whether the Vikings fully understood the complex chemistry of what they were doing, or if they simply knew through generations of trial and error that this essential step resulted in a better smelt. You don't think in terms of hydrated ferric oxides or carbonate decomposition. You think of what your master taught you. Roast it till the swamp stink is gone and it crumbles like dry bread. It is a knowledge of the hands and the nose, not of the mind. As the afternoon wears on, you notice the change. You use your poker to hook a piece of ore from the edge of the embers. It no longer looks like a lump of mud. It has turned a deep, dark red, almost black in places, and it's riddled with tiny cracks. You place it on a nearby stone and tap it with the poker. Instead of a dull thud, it breaks with a crisp crack, crumbling into smaller, porous fragments. The swamp stink is gone, replaced by the dry, sharp smell of hot rock and mineral. The spirit of the iron is awake. You let the fire burn down, banking the embers over the roasted ore to allow it to cool slowly and evenly. A sudden quench with water would shock the brittle material into dust. As evening approaches, your work for the day is done. The pile of dark, crumbly material in the pit bears little resemblance to the wet muck you pulled from the bog. It is now properly called iron ore, ready for the furnace. You look at the transformed material. If Kettle, the freedman, were to see it now, he'd probably be very confused and ask for his fish back. The real magic, the transformation from rock to metal, has yet to begin. This was just the patient, quiet, necessary preparation. Another morning begins, cool and quiet. You check on the roasted ore in its pit. It's cool to the touch, dry and crumbly, and smells of nothing but stone and old fire. It is ready. But the ore is only one half of the equation. To turn that earthy substance into metal, you will need a fire of incredible intensity, a heat far greater than any cooking hearth can provide. You need a special kind of fuel. You need charcoal. A core historical fact of ancient metallurgy is that you cannot smelt iron with wood. Wood, even when dry, contains a great deal of water and tars. It burns with a smoky, relatively cool flame. To reach the temperatures needed to coax iron from its ore, you need nearly pure carbon, a fuel that burns with a clean, white-hot, and consistent heat. That fuel is charcoal. And like the iron ore itself, you must make it yourself. This is a task that will consume the next several days. Your day begins at the woodpile behind your smithy. Here, logs of hardwood, mostly oak and birch, have been seasoning for more than a year, their ends checked and gray. Using green wood would be a fool's errand, as the sap and moisture would create a steamy, sputtering fire that yields useless, crumbly charcoal. You spend the next few hours in a steady, rhythmic trance of labor. You heft your axe, its familiar weight a comfort in your hands, and begin splitting the logs. The sharp thwack of steel on wood is the only sound, punctuated by the woody crack as a log splits clean. You work until you have a massive pile of wood, all cut to roughly the same length, about as long as your arm. You choose a location for the burn, a flat, clear patch of earth a safe distance from any buildings, sheltered from the wind by a small copse of trees. Here you will build what is known as a charcoal clamp, a simple temporary kiln. You begin by driving 3 stout poles into the ground, forming a small triangle at the center. This will be the chimney, the heart of the structure. Then begins the meticulous, painstaking work of stacking. You take the split logs and stand them on their ends, leaning them against the central chimney poles. You pack them in as tightly as possible, fitting the contours of one piece against the next. You build outwards, layer by layer, creating a large, conical mound of wood. The structure grows steadily, a giant wooden teepee rising from the earth. Precision is key. Any large air gaps will allow the fire to burn too freely, turning your precious wood into a pile of useless ash instead of charcoal. It feels like the world's most consequential game of Jenga. A single mistake in the foundation could bring the whole thing down, wasting a day's work and a winter's worth of seasoned wood. This process of transformation, of turning good solid wood into a black, lightweight, and mysteriously powerful fuel, was once viewed as a kind of alchemy. A quirky tidbit from folklore is that charcoal burners were often seen as solitary, secretive figures, living apart from the community. They were the masters of the slow fire people who understood how to choke a flame and force it to do their bidding, and this arcane knowledge sometimes made their neighbors view them with a mixture of suspicion and awe. Once the last piece of wood is in place, the mound stands as tall as you, a silent wooden cone. Now you must seal it. You spend the next hour covering the entire structure with a thick blanket of turf and damp earth, packing it down firmly. You work from the bottom up, sealing every crack and crevice, insulating the wood from the outside air. It's like you're carefully tucking the entire woodpile into bed under a heavy, earthen duvet, preparing it for a long and smoky slumber. You leave only a small opening at the top of the chimney and a few tiny, strategically placed vents around the base, which you can plug or unplug with balls of turf to control the airflow. Historians still argue whether the more permanent pit-style charcoal kilns were in common use during this era, or if the simpler temporary surface clamp method you are using was the standard for a village smith. Your method is certainly less efficient. A good portion of the wood will be lost, but it is the way your master taught you. A tradition of hands and hard work. It requires no special structures, only knowledge and patience. As the sun begins to dip towards the horizon, the clamp is complete. It is a silent, featureless mound of earth, giving no hint of the tightly stacked wood within. To a stranger passing by, it might look like you've just spent your entire day making a very large and oddly shaped mud pie. You are tired. Your muscles ache from the chopping and the lifting. Another day of hard labor has passed, and you have not yet struck a single blow with a hammer. The forging of the freedman's ring requires this slow, deep preparation. The fire must be earned before it can be used. Tonight the clamp will sit and settle. Tomorrow you will give it its fire. The sun rises on the great earthen mound. Today you will bring it to life. This is a delicate process. You don't simply set the exterior ablaze. The fire must begin in the heart of the clamp and smolder outwards, slowly and with great restraint. You climb a small ladder and carefully drop a bundle of dry tinder and a scoop of glowing embers from your smithiest hearth down the central chimney. For a moment nothing happens. Then a lazy curl of smoke, pale and thin, rises from the chimney top. You watch, holding your breath. The curl thickens, becoming a steady, gentle plume. The slow fire has begun. Your work for the next few days will be a vigil. You are no longer a woodcutter or a builder, you are a watcher. The process of pyrolysis, the magical transformation of wood into charcoal, is a long and smoky affair. You set up a temporary camp a short distance away. A simple 3-sided lean-to, a water skin, and a bag of dried fish and hard bread. You cannot leave the clamp unattended for long. It is a living, breathing thing now, and it needs constant supervision. This is the ultimate slow cooker recipe. Prep time 1 day. Cook time anywhere from 3 to 7 days depending on the wood, the weather, and the whims of the fire. Your only job is to watch the smoke and not let the whole thing burn to ash, which is a surprisingly tricky task for a giant pile of wood that is actively on fire. The first day is the water phase. The smoke that pours from the chimney is thick, white, and billowy, smelling heavily of steam and fresh wood smoke. This is the fire driving out the last of the moisture from the seasoned logs. There is little for you to do but watch this great exhalation. ensuring the burn is even and that no rogue flames are escaping from the clamp's earthen skin. The real skill of the charcoal burner, a mainstream historical fact of this ancient craft, lies in reading the smoke. The smoke is your only window into the sealed world inside the mound. Its color, its density, its smell, these are the gauges that tell you everything you need to know. As the second day dawns, you notice the change you've been waiting for. The smoke thins slightly and takes on a yellowish, greasy tinge. The smell becomes sharper, more acrid. These are the wood tars and gases burning away, the complex organic compounds of the wood breaking down under the heat in the oxygen-starved environment. The clamp is now in its most critical phase. You walk slow, careful circles around the mound, like a wolf circling a campfire. You look for telltale signs of trouble, spots where the earth has cracked, allowing air to rush in and create true fire. You find one such spot, a small jet of angry orange flame licking out from the base. You quickly fetch a bucket of wet clay and slap it over the breach, sealing it shut. This is the rhythm of your vigil. Watch, walk, patch, wait. There's a quirky tidbit of charcoal burner lore that speaks to the deep intuitive nature of this work. The old masters claimed they could listen to the burn, pressing an ear to the turf shell or to the ground nearby to hear the deep, internal groans and sighs of the wood as it settled and transformed. You give it a try, kneeling down and pressing your ear against the warm earth. You don't hear any profound secrets, but you do get a face full of dirt and earn a very confused look from a passing squirrel, who seems to be questioning your life choices. Days and nights blur into a smoky haze. You sleep in short bursts, your senses always half awake, attuned to any change in the wind or the fire's tone. Historians still argue about the exact efficiency of these simple earth clamps, with yield estimates varying wildly from as low as 20% to as high as 60%. But they all agree on one thing. The final result depended almost entirely on the skill of the burner in reading the smoke and controlling the airflow. Then, on the afternoon of the fourth day, you see it. The smoke changes again. The yellow tarry haze thins and clarifies, turning into a faint, shimmering pale blue. The acrid smell is gone, replaced by a clean, dry heat in the air scent. This is the final signal. The wood gases are spent. The transformation is complete. Inside that mound is no longer wood but charcoal. Now you must kill the fire completely. You climb your ladder and seal the top of the chimney with a large flat stone and a thick plastering of wet clay. Then you hurry around the base, plugging every last vent with tightly packed turf. You make the entire structure airtight. Starved of oxygen, the glowing heart of the clamp will slowly suffocate and cool. To open it now would be disastrous. The rush of fresh air would cause the superheated charcoal to erupt in flames, destroying a week's worth of patient work. Your long watch is over. You are covered in grime, and your clothes, your hair, your very skin seems permanently infused with the smell of a campfire. If you were to walk into the longhouse now, you'd be a bigger hit than the hearth fire itself, at least for anyone with a fondness for smoked meats. You pack up your meager camp. The fuel is made. It simply needs to rest, to cool its heels for another few days in its dark earthen shell. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, you can go home and sleep in your own bed. Several days pass in quiet, productive rhythm. The charcoal clamp sits in its field, a silent, cooling mound. You have resisted the temptation to open it, knowing that the treasure within needs this time to settle, its inner fire dying to a gentle warmth. You've spent the intervening days on the small necessary tasks of a village smith, sharpening a farmer's axe, mending a cooking pot, and enjoying the simple pleasure of a full night's sleep in a bed that doesn't smell overwhelmingly of smoke. But today your focus returns to the freedman's ring. The charcoal is almost ready. The roasted ore is waiting. It is time to prepare the womb where the new iron will be born, the bloomery furnace. This furnace is not the hearth you use for everyday forging. It is a separate, dedicated structure that stands in a cleared space behind your smithy. It is a humble-looking thing, a short, stout chimney of clay and stone, about as high as your waist. It is rough, lumpy, and fire-blackened, but this simple-looking tool is the key to the entire process. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking-age smiths could not melt iron. The melting point of iron, over 1500 degrees Celsius, was beyond their reach. The bloomery furnace performs a different kind of magic. It gets just hot enough to facilitate a chemical reaction, reducing the iron oxide in the ore back into metallic iron. This new iron forms a spongy, porous mass, the bloom, while the rock and earth impurities melt into a liquid slag that can be drained away. The intense heat of each smelt is brutal on the furnace. You begin with an inspection, running your hands over the fired clay walls. They are covered in a network of fine cracks from the last firing, and near the base is a larger fissure where the clay has crumbled away. Before you can ask it to withstand another inferno, you must heal its wounds. The repair work begins with making the plaster. You mix a fresh batch of clay, sand, and water in a shallow wooden trough. You add a generous amount of finely chopped straw and a handful of dried horse dung. This organic material will burn away in the heat, leaving tiny voids in the clay that help it resist cracking from thermal shock. You roll up your trousers and get into the trough, mixing the materials with your feet, the cool, thick mud squelching between your toes. It feels like you're making the world's largest, least appetizing mud pie. Your inner child is having a wonderful time. The adult who has to wash his feet later is less enthused. With the clay mixed to a thick, even consistency, you begin the repairs. You scoop up great handfuls of the mixture and press it firmly into the cracks, smoothing it over with your palms. You work both inside and out, your arms disappearing into the furnace's dark opening. It is a tactile, intimate process, like tending to a living creature. There's a quirky, superstitious aspect to this work. Some smiths might carve a protective rune into the wet clay, or mix a splash of ale into their patch mixture as an offering for a successful smelt. The furnace is, in a way, a sacred space, and you treat it with due respect. You pay special attention to two key areas. The first is the opening for the tuyere, the clay nozzle that will protect your bellows and direct the blast of air into the furnace ES core. You reshape the opening, ensuring the angle is just right, canted slightly downwards to create a churning, superheated vortex exactly where you need it. The second area is the tapping arch at the base, a small opening currently plugged with old clay. This is where the molten slag will eventually pour forth. You clear out the old material and rebuild the archway, ready to be sealed with a temporary plug. The furnace is patched, its skin of clay now seamless and smooth, but it cannot be used yet. The wet clay must be dried slowly and completely. A sudden intense heat would turn the moisture within to steam, and the furnace would crack apart or even explode. So you build a small, gentle fire of twigs and dry sticks inside it. This is a drying fire, a preheating that will take the rest of the day. Blacksmithing, you reflect, is an occupation that involves an astonishing amount of just waiting for things to get hot or cool down. It is far from the action-packed chaos people might imagine. As you watch the small fire flicker inside, you think about the furnace's design. Historians still argue about the exact shapes and sizes of these bloomeries, as the archaeological evidence is often just a vitrified slag pit and a few broken shards of the chimney wall. The height, the width, whether they were tapped at the side or the bottom, it all likely varied from smith to smith, region to region. All you know is that this design, the one your master taught you, works. As evening falls, a soft orange light emanates from the mouth of the small furnace. It looks like a miniature sleeping volcano, its gentle warmth a promise of the furious power it will soon contain. You give it a fond pat, almost tempted to give it a name. Sparky, perhaps. Then you remember the roaring, slag-spitting inferno it is destined to become, and you decide it is best to maintain a respectful, professional distance. The ore is roasted, the charcoal is cooling. The furnace is now prepared. All the scattered pieces of your long preparation are finally coming together. Today is the day of fire. The charcoal clamp has cooled, and with the help of a neighbor's boy, you spend the morning carefully dismantling it. You break apart the hard-baked earthen shell, revealing the treasure within. Where once there was a pile of dense brown wood, there is now a mass of feather-light, jet-black charcoal. The original shapes of the logs are perfectly preserved, ghostly skeletons of their former selves. You tap one piece against another, and it makes a sharp, glassy clinking sound. This is the fuel of transformation. You spend 2 hours hauling it, basket by basket, to the waiting bloomery furnace. It's like unwrapping a present you made for yourself a week ago. The gift is a giant pile of black dust and chunks, but for a smith it's better than gold. The repaired furnace is hard and dry, its new clay patches cured by the gentle fire you made days ago. Everything is ready. You lay out your materials in an orderly system. The mountain of charcoal on one side, the smaller heap of crumbly reddish-black ore on the other. You connect the twin leather bags of your bellows to the clay tuyere, the nozzle that will pump the furnace's breath. You lay out your long iron pokers and tongs. A deep breath. The work begins. You start by filling the furnace shaft about halfway with your new, crisp charcoal. You drop in a few hot embers from your smithy hearth, and as the charcoal catches, you begin to work the bellows. This isn't a small handheld device, it's a large stationary machine operated by a long wooden lever. You fall into a steady rhythm, pushing and pulling, the leather bags inhaling and exhaling with a deep whoosh clack. Whoosh clack. This is a crucial mainstream fact of the process. You must bring the furnace up to a roaring, stable heat before adding any ore. This preheating can take the better part of an hour. A furious monologue of fire before the real conversation can begin. Slowly, the furnace comes to life. The soft glow deep within its belly intensifies, the roar growing from a whisper to a steady, hungry drone. Bright, clean flames, nearly invisible in the daylight, begin to dance from the chimney's top. The walls of the furnace begin to radiate a serious heat. It is time. You take your first charge, a small shovel full of roasted ore, and pour it down the chimney, followed immediately by another layer of charcoal. A charge of ore, a charge of fuel. This will be your mantra for the rest of the day. You settle into the monotonous, demanding cycle of the smelt. Every 15 minutes or so, you add another layer of ore and charcoal, and between each charge, you pump the bellows. The rhythm is relentless. Charge, pump, wait, watch. The roar of the furnace fills your ears. The heat presses against your skin. The air shimmers. Inside that inferno, a quiet miracle is happening. The burning charcoal produces a gas, carbon monoxide, which surges upwards through the layers. This gas is hungry for oxygen, and as it passes through the hot ore, it violently rips the oxygen atoms away from the iron oxide. This chemical reaction frees the iron, which forms into tiny solid particles. These particles, heavier than the surrounding material, begin to slowly sink through the furnace, consolidating as they fall, drawn to each other in the intense heat. You're part chef, part therapist for rocks. You're feeding them fire and trying to convince them to let go of their oxygen baggage. A quirky tidbit of smithing lore is that every smelt has its own personality. Some are easy and cooperative, giving up their iron without a fight. Others are stubborn, resisting the heat, the fire sputtering and choking. You learn to listen to the furnace's voice, to coax it, to treat the process like a delicate negotiation with the elements of earth and fire. After a few hours, you see a sign of progress. It is time to tap the slag. Taking a long, heavy iron bar, you approach the furnace and ram the pointed end through the clay plug at the tapping arch. You pull it free, and a moment later, a thick, incandescent trickle of molten waste products emerges. This river of liquid rock, glowing a brilliant orange-yellow, flows onto the ground, where it cools into brittle, glassy stone. This is a good sign. It means the furnace is hot enough to melt the impurities, separating them from the still solid iron. You quickly plug the hole with a fresh ball of clay and return to your rhythm. Historians still argue about the specifics of these ancient smelts, the duration, the fuel-to-ore ratios, the final yield. Experimental archaeology suggests a small furnace like this might run for 6 to 8 hours to produce a bloom weighing just a few kilograms. You don't measure the hours. You measure by the pile of ore. You will continue the cycle until it is all gone. The sun traces its long arc across the sky. You are drenched in sweat. Your arms and back ache from the constant work of the bellows, and your face is flushed from the relentless heat. You do not stop. The furnace demands your complete attention. Finally, you pour in the last of the roasted ore, topping it with a final generous layer of charcoal. The most demanding phase is over. Now you must let the furnace consume this final meal. Deep inside that roaring clay and stone vessel, a new lump of iron, the result of a full day's labor, a week's preparation, and a bog's ancient patience, is waiting to be born. Your only hope is that you've made iron and not just a very, very expensive puddle of lava. Awaiting, continue E. The sun has touched the horizon, painting the fjord in hues of orange and purple. The last of the ore has been consumed. You continue to work the bellows for another hour, a steady, rhythmic breath to ensure the furnace's final meal is fully digested. The roar of the fire deepens, the pitch changing from a high-throated shout to a low, rumbling growl. The contents of the furnace are settling. The iron has had time to gather itself in the heat. It is time. There is no bell or timer to tell you this. It is a feeling, an intuition, born of experience, a knowledge that lives in your hands and in your ears. The next few minutes will be a whirlwind of heat and effort. There is no gentle way to do this. You take up a heavy, blunt-ended iron ram, its weight familiar in your grasp. With a deep breath to steady yourself, you swing it against the base of the furnace, smashing into the new clay you so carefully applied days ago. The first blow sends a spiderweb of cracks across the surface. The second breaks it open. A wave of incandescent heat, a physical presence washes over you, far more intense than anything you have felt all day. You squint against the glare. Inside the furnace's heart, amidst a chaotic jumble of glowing charcoal, sits your prize. It is the bloom. It is not a neat ingot or a pool of liquid metal. It is a lumpy, misshapen, otherworldly thing, a porous mass of iron and slag glowing with a brilliant, white-hot light like a captured piece of the sun. Now comes the struggle, a moment often called the birthing of the bloom. You grab a pair of long, heavy tongs, their jaws wide enough to grip the unruly mass. You lean in, the heat scorching your eyebrows and the woolen fabric of your tunic. You push the tongs deep into the fiery guts of the furnace, trying to get a purchase on the bloom. It's like trying to pull a very angry, very hot porcupine out of a volcano using a giant pair of chopsticks. The bloom is wedged tight, heavy and awkward. Your muscles strain as you lever the tongs, trying to pry it loose from the furnace floor. Sparks erupt in a furious shower, and the furnace gives a great whooshing sigh as you shift the bloom. With a final desperate heave, you pull it free. It comes loose with a grinding screech and a cascade of embers. You wrestle the glowing monster out of the opening and, stumbling backwards from the heat, guide it onto a large, flat anvil stone you had placed nearby. You stand back, leaning on your tongs, chest heaving. The empty furnace crackles and groans behind you. It's great work, done. On the stone before you, the bloom sits and breathes, its light pulsating in the gathering twilight. This spongy, incandescent mass is the raw material for all your work. A mainstream historical fact is that this single, slag-riddled lump is the direct and only product of a bloomery furnace. All Viking Age iron objects, from the simplest nail to the most intricate sword, began their life as a lumpy, ugly thing just like this one. A moment of quiet reverence settles over you. The day of fire and fury has been successful. A quirky tradition among smiths compels you to make a small gesture of thanks. You unhook the small drinking horn from your belt and pour a little of the water, or perhaps its ale, onto the hot ground beside the bloom. A hiss of steam rises, a small offering to whatever spirits govern fire and iron, a thank you for a safe birth. The work is not quite over. While the bloom is still pliable and glowing, you pick up a heavy wooden mallet. You begin to strike the bloom with steady, rhythmic blows. This isn't shaping, not yet. This is consolidation. Each blow knocks loose a shower of glowing liquid slag and embers, compacting the spongy iron, beginning to weld it into a more solid mass. It's a bit like burping the baby, just a few gentle pats to get the gunk off before the real work begins. Historians still argue about the precise techniques used at this stage. Some archaeological finds suggest the bloom was allowed to cool completely before being reheated and worked, while other evidence points to this immediate, hot compaction method. You simply follow the wisdom passed down to you. A light hammering now saves a heavy one later. As you work, the bloom's fierce white light mellows to a deep cherry red. It looks ugly, brutish, and utterly primordial. But it is iron. You have done it. You have turned dirt and wood into metal. As the last of the light fades from the sky, you leave the newborn bloom to cool under the stars. It may be the ugliest baby in the world, but in this moment, you are the proudest of parents. Morning arrives, and with it, the familiar aches of a day spent in the presence of intense fire. You go to the anvil stone where the iron bloom has spent the night. It is now a cold, dead thing, a lump of black and grayish rock, ugly and inert. It looks more like a meteorite that has fallen from the sky than something you created. When you try to lift it, its weight is surprising, but it feels porous, almost hollow. Its surface is a chaotic landscape of hardened slag drips, embedded charcoal, and deep, spongy-looking crevices. This is the raw material, but it is not yet iron in any useful sense. It is a promise that must be kept through sweat and steel. You heave the heavy, awkward bloom from the stone and with a grunt, carry it into your smithy. This is a significant moment. The iron is leaving its birthplace, the outdoor bloomery, and entering the workshop, the place where it will be shaped and refined. You drop it with a dull thud on the earthen floor next to your main forge. First, you must wake your own hearth. You clean out the old ash and clinker and build a deep U-shaped fire of fresh charcoal. This forge is different from the bloomery. It is designed not for creation, but for reheating, for the focused application of heat that will allow you to shape the metal. You work the bellows and the charcoal quickly ignites, the heart of the fire growing from a red glow to a brilliant, shimmering yellow-white. Using a heavy pair of tongs, you lift the cold bloom and thrust it deep into the fire's core, burying it in the glowing coals. This is the beginning of the long refining process. A crucial historical fact of ironworking is that the raw bloom is a fragile, slag-riddled mess. It must be brought back up to a welding heat, a temperature so high that the iron becomes soft and plastic like clay, and the slag trapped within its pores turns back into a liquid. While the bloom heats, you select your tool for this first brutal conversation. Not a light hammer for delicate work, but a heavy, long-handled sledgehammer. This is a tool of pure, percussive force, meant to be swung with two hands and the strength of your entire body. Your anvil is a massive, flat-topped block of iron, set deep into the earth to absorb the powerful shocks. You watch the bloom in the fire, your eyes shielded from the glare. You are looking for that specific color, the bright, almost white incandescence that tells you the iron is ready. When the moment comes, you move with purpose. You pull the glowing, dripping mass from the forge, swing it over to the anvil, and in one motion, you raise the sledgehammer high over your shoulder and bring it down. The impact is not the clean, ringing sound of a smithy. It is a dull, wet, percussive squelch. And with that sound, the bloom explodes. A brilliant firework display of white and orange sparks erupts in all directions as the liquefied slag, trapped within the iron's spongy structure, is violently ejected by the force of the blow. The air instantly fills with the sharp smell of hot iron and the sulfurous tang of the vaporized slag. This is less like smithing and more like being a human jackhammer, but with a much higher risk of setting your tunic on fire. This is the rhythm of your day, a cycle of fire and fury. You hammer the bloom with heavy, overlapping blows, turning it over and over, until its color fades from brilliant yellow to a dull orange-red. It is now too cool to work. You heave it back into the forge, work the bellows to drive the heat back into it, and wait for that telltale color to return. Then you pull it out and the angry hammering begins again. Heat. Hammer. Repeat. This first violent stage of the work is often thought of as taming the iron. A quirky way to see it is that you are beating the wildness out of the bloom. It was born of earth and fire, and it is still full of that raw, chaotic earth. With every blow, you are driving the impurities out, forcing the iron particles to weld together, compelling the material to become disciplined, strong, and useful. Historians still argue about the manpower for this stage. While a single strong smith could manage it, many period illustrations and practical experiments suggest that a master smith would often use a striker, an assistant who did the heavy swinging with the sledgehammer while the master directed the blows and manipulated the hot iron. But this is a simple freedman's ring, a quiet commission, and so you work alone, your own muscles paying the price. Your back screams in protest and your arms feel like overcooked noodles. As the day wears on, a slow transformation occurs. The bloom shrinks, becoming smaller and denser with each cycle. The sound of the hammer blows begins to change, the wet squelch gradually giving way to a more solid, resonant thud. The explosions of slag become less spectacular. The spongy, coral-like mass is slowly being compacted into a rough, vaguely rectangular block. It's still ugly, but it's a well-behaved kind of ugly now, Its rebellious slag-spitting phase is mostly over. The first angry conversation is done. The sun filters through the smoke hole in the roof of your smithy, illuminating dancing dust motes in the cool morning air. You are tired, your muscles singing with the deep ache of yesterday's labor with the sledgehammer. By the cold stone hearth lies the fruit of that labor, a dark, dense, and still rather lumpy block of iron. It is no longer a bloom, but it is not yet a bar. It is a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Before you can continue to shape it, you must reawaken the heart of your workshop. You must wake the fire. Your smithy is a place of organized purpose. In the half-light, everything is in its place, a landscape of potential energy. On the far wall, a dozen pairs of tongs of every imaginable size and shape hang in a neat row, their long handles pointing to the earthen floor. Next to them, a rack of hammers, their faces ranging from flat to rounded, their wooden handles stained dark with sweat and smoke. Chisels, punches, and drifts rest in a heavy wooden box, their sharpened ends gleaming dully. At the center of this world sits the anvil, a patient, silent block of solid iron, its surface smoothed and slightly dished from 1,000 projects, 1,000 conversations with hot metal. But the true center, the soul of the room, is the forge. It is a raised hearth, built of river stones and clay, blackened by years of use. A leather and wood hood hangs over it, funneling upwards to the roof, a chimney for the smoke that will soon fill the air. It is cold now, a gray bed of ash and charcoal remnants from yesterday's fire. It smells of soot and finality. Your first task of the day is to bring it back to life. With a small iron rake, you gently clear out the dead clinker and ash, preparing a clean bed for the new fire. You lay in a generous mound of the crisp, lightweight charcoal you made, forming a deep nest in the center of the hearth. You could use flint and steel, but today you use a quieter method. You retrieve a single precious ember, carefully carried from your cottage's cooking fire, nestled in a small clay pot filled with dried moss. It is a tiny, glowing seed of warmth, a link between the fire that cooks your food and the fire that shapes your world. You place the ember gently into the charcoal nest. Then, you move to the bellows. This is a magnificent piece of engineering, a mainstream historical fact of the era being that these large, double-chambered bellows were a huge leap forward. As you pull the long lever up, one leather bag inflates through a clever one-way valve. As you push down, that bag expels its air through the tuyere into the fire, while the second bag inflates. This creates a nearly constant, powerful stream of air. You begin slowly. The first few breaths from the bellows are gentle, a soft whoosh of air that nudges the ember. It brightens, and a tiny wisp of white smoke curls upwards. You continue, a slow and steady rhythm. A piece of charcoal next to the ember begins to glow. Then another. Waking the forge is a lot like making your morning coffee. It's a slow, essential ritual, and absolutely nothing useful can happen until it is complete. As you increase the tempo of the bellows, the fire responds. The gentle glow erupts into a bed of incandescent coals, and the soft hiss transforms into a hungry, breathing roar. The light intensifies, pushing back the morning shadows, making the tools on the wall gleam. The smithy is awake. Its heart is beating once more. You can feel the warmth on your face and hands. It's a living presence in the room now, a very hot pet dragon that, in exchange for a steady diet of charcoal, helps you make a living. A quirky private ritual, a nod to the smith's luck, compels you to tap the face of the anvil 3 times with your hammer. The clear ringing notes a greeting to the day's work. Historians still argue whether the village smith of this age was a full-time, dedicated specialist or simply a farmer with a valuable side hustle. As you stand in this purpose-built space, surrounded by hundreds of hours worth of charcoal, specialized tools, and the hulking bloomery furnace outside, you can't help but think this is no part-time hobby. The forge fire is now a churning vortex of white-hot energy. It is ready. It is hungry. And its first meal of the day is waiting. You select a strong pair of flat-jawed tongs, their size matched to the rough billet of iron. The quiet, preparatory phase of the morning is over. Now, the real work of refining and shaping the freedman's neck ring can continue. You reach for the lumpy block of iron, ready to plunge it back into the fire it came from. The forge fire roars, a contained, hungry vortex of heat. With your tongs, you grasp the lumpy, consolidated bloom, now more of a billet, and thrust it into the glowing heart of the charcoal. You work the bellows with a steady, practiced rhythm, not with the frantic urgency of the smelt, but with the controlled breath needed for forging. You watch the iron, waiting for it to tell you it's ready. It absorbs the heat, its dark surface beginning to glow, moving up the spectrum from a dull red to a bright, cheerful cherry, and finally to a luminous, sun-like orange yellow. This is the heat for shaping. With a practiced efficiency, you pull the glowing iron from the fire and swing it onto the anvil. You drop the tongs and pick up your hammer. This is not the brute force sledgehammer from yesterday, but a lighter, more agile one-handed hammer. Its steel head featuring one flat face for smoothing and one wedge-shaped empine for directing the metal's flow. You begin the long, laborious process of drawing out the bar. This is a foundational blacksmithing skill, a mainstream technique for lengthening a piece of metal. You use the narrow peen of the hammer, striking the hot iron with a series of quick, overlapping blows. The focused force of the wedge-shaped head doesn't just dent the iron, it squeezes it, forcing the material to move outwards, away from the point of impact. You hammer along one side and the bar grows longer. It's the iron's personal training session, and you are its very demanding coach, commanding it to elongate with every blow. The iron, in turn, just gets longer and hotter under the collar. The sound in the smithy changes completely. Gone is the dull, wet squelch of the first compaction. It is replaced by a clear musical ring, the song of the anvil. Each hammer blow is a sharp percussive note, creating a rhythm, a cadence that fills the workshop. Ting, 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 tong, ting, 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 tong. An experienced smith's hammering pattern is as unique as a signature, a quirky tidbit of the craft being that this smith's song wasn't just for show, it was a language. A master working with a striker could communicate where to hit, how hard and when to stop, all through the rhythm of his own small hammer. Even working alone, you fall into this trance-like duet with the anvil. The work is a continuous flowing cycle. Heat the iron until it glows brightly. Hammer it, drawing it out, turning it 90 degrees to work the next side, keeping the cross-section roughly square. Watch the color fade from yellow to orange to red, the signal that the iron is losing its plasticity and becoming stubborn. Plunge it back into the fire's heart. Work the bellows. Repeat. With every strike, flakes of black iron oxide or scale fly from the surface, a shower of tiny, momentary sparks. The lumpy, stubborn block of iron slowly begins to submit to your will. Under the relentless persuasion of the hammer, its length extends, its sides flatten, its chaotic form resolving into a more disciplined, rectangular shape. But it is a constant struggle. The bar wants to bend. It tries to twist. One side lengthens faster than the other. Trying to forge a perfectly straight, even bar is like trying to comb a toddler's hair. The moment you get one section looking neat, another has already decided to veer off in a new direction. Your job is a constant process of correction, using the flat face of the hammer to smooth, the edge of the anvil to straighten, and your own practiced eye to judge the progress. Historians still argue whether the quality of this home's smelted iron was ever truly uniform, or if a smith's real genius lay in their ability to feel and work around the material's flaws. You can feel those flaws now under your hammer. There is a spot that feels softer where a pocket of slag is still hiding. There is a section that rings with a slightly duller note, indicating a lack of cohesion. You make a mental note of these imperfections. You will have to deal with them. Hours pass in this cycle of fire and steel. Your arm aches and your face is slick with sweat, but you do not stop. As the sun reaches its peak, you finally have something that can be truly called a bar. It is long, perhaps the length of your arm and a half, and roughly square. It is still covered in a thick layer of black scale, and it is far from perfect, but it has been transformed. It is no longer a wild, raw bloom. It is now stock. It is potential. It is finally starting to look less like a burnt potato and more like something you could build a world with. Or at least, a neck ring. You hold the long, rough bar of iron you forged yesterday. In the cool morning light of the smithy, its imperfections are plain to see. The surface is a landscape of dark fire scale, with pits and lines that hint at the impurities still trapped within. It is iron, yes, but it is not yet good iron. It is inconsistent, a mixture of hard and soft spots, still riddled with microscopic veins of slag. To create a neck ring that is both strong and smooth to the touch, you must purify it further. You must paradoxically break it apart to make it whole. This process of refinement is a mainstream historical fact of early ironworking. The iron produced in a bloomery was never perfectly uniform. To improve its quality, to homogenize the metal and squeeze out more of the stubborn slag, a smith would repeatedly fold the iron back on itself, like a baker kneading dough. This lamination process is what you will begin now. First, you must cut your single bar into several smaller pieces. Without a modern saw, this has to be done with heat and force. You thrust one end of the bar into the forge, heating a section to a glowing, malleable yellow. You then place the hot spot over the hardy hole, the square socket in your anvil's tail. Into this hole, you place a hot-cut hardy, which is essentially a sharp heat-treated chisel pointing upwards. You position the glowing bar over this sharp edge and strike the top of the bar with your hammer. The blow drives the soft hot iron onto the chisel, creating a deep groove. You quickly turn the bar 90 degrees and repeat the process, grooving all four sides. It feels like you're following a strange recipe for deconstruction, the Viking Age version of some assembly required, except you're starting with the disassembly. With the section deeply scored, a single sharp hammer blow snaps the piece off. It falls to the floor with a metallic clatter. You now have one short iron billet. You place the long bar back in the fire and repeat the process again and again. Slowly, a small pile of iron bricks grows at the foot of your anvil. Now you must prepare these pieces to be rejoined into a single, stronger whole. You take the small billets and arrange them into a neat, tight stack, maybe 5 pieces high. This new layered block is called a billet. To keep the pieces from sliding apart in the fire, you bind them together with a couple of twists of thin, soft iron wire, a temporary clamp that will be consumed by the fire. The next step is critical for what is to come. You are preparing for a forge weld, the magical process of joining 2 pieces of iron into one without solder or rivets. For a weld to work, the surfaces of the metal must be perfectly clean at the moment of joining. But at the extreme temperatures needed for welding, iron reacts instantly with the air, forming a thick crust of scale that would ruin the weld. To prevent this, you need a flux. Your flux is not a complex chemical. It is a small wooden bowl of clean, dry sand. A quirky tidbit of the craft is that smiths would often have their preferred source for flux, sand from a particular river bend or ground-up stone from a certain hill, believing it held special properties. In truth, the magic is in the silica. You place the wired-up billet into the forge and begin to heat it. When it reaches a bright orange, you pull it from the fire for a moment and generously sprinkle the sand all over it. The sand sticks to the hot surface, especially along the seams between the pieces. You're essentially seasoning your iron, but instead of a tasty dry rub, you're using beach sand, and the final dish will be inedible. Historians still argue about the exact recipes for ancient fluxes. While sand was common, analysis of archaeological sites sometimes hints at more complex mixtures, suggesting that master smiths may have had closely guarded secrets. For your part, you use the fine, pale sand your master taught you to use. You return the fluxed billet to the fire. Now the real heating begins. As the temperature climbs, you can see the sand begin to melt, bubbling and flowing over the billet like a glassy liquid shield. This molten layer serves 2 purposes. It seals the iron off from the oxygen in the air, and it dissolves the scale that is already formed, washing the surfaces clean. You work the bellows, your eyes fixed on the billet in the heart of the fire. The orange glow intensifies to yellow, then to a brilliant, searing white, the color of the sun at noon. The edges of the individual pieces begin to blur. The whole stack seems to sweat under its glassy coat of flux. It is on the very brink of dissolving. This is welding heat. To an outsider, it would look as if you've made your own job infinitely harder by chopping up a perfectly good bar, just to glue it back together with fire. But you know this is the only path to the pure, strong iron that the freedman's ring deserves. The billet of stacked iron rests in the deepest, hottest part of the forge. You lean in, your face shielded by a raised arm, and watch. This is a moment of intense focus, the culmination of all the preparation that has come before. The metal glows a brilliant yellow, and the coat of sand flux bubbles like a thick, glassy syrup. You pump the bellows, pushing more air, more heat into the fire. The yellow brightens to a searing white, the color of lightning. It's a light so intense it almost hurts to look at, and you must judge it through squinted eyes. Then, you see the signal. Tiny, star-like sparks begin to sizzle and spit from the billet's surface. This is the iron itself beginning to burn. You have reached the precipice. You have seconds to act. In one smooth, fluid motion, you pull the sputtering, dripping billet from the fire. There is no time for hesitation. The journey from forge to anvil is a frantic moment, a race against thermodynamics. You swing the glowing mass onto the anvil's face, and it lands with a soft, solid thud. Now is not the time for mighty blows. The first moments of a forge weld are a gentle persuasion. You take your hammer and deliver a series of light, quick taps, starting in the center of the stack and working your way out to the edges. With each tap, a spectacular shower of liquid flux sprays outwards, glowing brilliantly as it flies through the air. It is as if the iron is bleeding light. The sound is not a ringing, but a dense, solid thwump, the sound of layers of hot, soft metal being pressed into intimate contact. This is the patient magic of the forge weld, a mainstream historical fact of the craft. At this extreme temperature, the iron is in a state of solid-state diffusion. The atoms on the surfaces of each piece are so energized they can migrate across the boundaries, forming new, powerful metallic bonds. Your light hammer blows are just the catalyst, setting the weld by squeezing the pieces together and, crucially, forcing out the last of the liquid flux and slag that would otherwise be trapped, creating a flaw. You are in essence stitching the iron together with fire and pressure. The iron has gone through its first group therapy session, and the 5 separate pieces are finally bonding into one supportive unit. You can feel the success of the weld through the handle of your hammer. A quirky, unteachable aspect of the craft is the feel of the metal. A good weld feels solid, alive. A failed one feels mushy and dead under the hammer. This one feels right. The whole process takes less than 10 seconds before the billet has cooled too much, its brilliant white fading to a dull orange. The initial weld is set, but it is not yet complete. You lift the now tacked together billet and thrust it back into the fire. You work the bellows again, bringing it back up to that same sizzling incandescent heat. The second time you bring it to the anvil, you can be more forceful. The billet is now a single, coherent block. You can strike it with heavier, more solid blows. This time the hammer's song is different. It is no longer a dull thud but a rising, resonant ring. You are not just setting a weld now, you are refining it, driving the bond deeper and beginning to consolidate the new, thicker bar of iron. Historians still argue about how many times a smith would need to repeat this process to create high-quality iron. Grand sagas speak of legendary swords being folded and welded dozens of times. For a simple neck ring, however, such heroic efforts are not needed. You decide that this one, careful weld will be enough to give the iron the integrity and uniformity it needs. After the second welding heat, you let the bar cool to a deep, glowing red and you hold it up to inspect your work. You look closely at the seams. A perfect weld is invisible. You can see no dark lines, no fissures that would indicate a pocket of trapped slag or a failure to join. The 5 bars have ceased to exist. In their place is one, solid, thicker bar. You have done it. You have performed successful metallurgical surgery. The patient, once in 5 pieces, is now whole again, and stronger than before. This patient, however, must now endure being hammered into a completely new shape. The long process of purification is finally complete. The iron is ready. The newly welded bar lies on the anvil, a thick, solid block of iron, still radiating a deep, calming warmth. It is a vast improvement on the raw, lumpy billet you started with. The 5 pieces have become one, but as you inspect it more closely, turning it over and running the head of your hammer along its surface, you detect a subtle flaw. There is a faint, almost invisible line near one end where the weld wasn't quite perfect, and when you tap it, The ringing sound is just slightly duller in that spot. It is a tiny imperfection, one that would probably go unnoticed in a nail or a hinge. But this is not a nail. This is a man's declaration of freedom. It must be as close to perfect as you can make it. Your pride as a craftsman and your respect for the commission will not let it rest. You must refine it again. So begins another day of what, to an outsider, would look like undoing your own work. You are about to take this solid bar, which you spent a whole day creating, and chop it back into pieces. It's like carefully writing a chapter of a book, only to decide to cut it up into paragraphs and rearrange them for better flow. It feels counterintuitive, but you know it is the right path to a better result. You heat the bar, and once again, you use the hot-cut hardy in your anvil to groove and snap it into smaller sections. This time the iron is more cooperative. It cuts more cleanly, the blows of your hammer ringing with a clearer note. You cut the bar into 4 even pieces, and just as before, you stack them into a neat new billet, binding them with soft iron wire. The next steps are a familiar rhythm, a repetition of the dance you performed yesterday. You heat the new stack in the forge. You sprinkle it with the sandy flux. You watch the flux melt and bubble, creating its glassy protective shield. A key mainstream historical fact is that this repeated folding and welding is what separates mediocre iron from truly excellent iron. Each time the process is done, more slag is squeezed out, and the internal structure of the metal becomes more uniform and refined. The different pockets of high and low carbon iron blending together into a more homogeneous whole. You bring the billet to that shimmering, sizzling white heat. You move it to the anvil. This time, as you begin to set the weld with your light hammer taps, you can feel the difference immediately. The weld takes more readily, the pieces joining with a satisfying solidity from the first blow. The iron feels less like a collection of separate parts and more like a single entity that wants to be whole. You have been working this same piece of metal for days now, from the moment you pulled it as ore from the bog. A quirky aspect of the craft is this intimacy you develop with the material. You know its temper, its history, its hidden flaws. This second weld is less a battle and more a conversation with an old acquaintance. After setting the weld, you immediately begin the next phase. With the iron still at a bright yellow heat, you start drawing out the bar again. The metal moves beautifully now, flowing under your hammer with a smooth, predictable plasticity that is a joy to work. It lengthens and straightens with far less argument than before. Historians still argue whether ancient smiths had a scientific understanding of concepts like work hardening or grain refinement, or if the results were simply attributed to the smith's personal skill and the number of times the iron was purified. You don't think in those terms. You only know the truth you can feel in your hands and in your bones. More work makes better iron. You spend the rest of the day at this rhythmic, repetitive, yet deeply satisfying task. Heat, hammer, and lengthen. By the time the afternoon light begins to fade, you have a bar of the same dimensions as the one you started with this morning. But it is a different creature entirely. As it cools to black, you can see the surface is smoother, the corners sharper. When you tap it against the anvil, it rings with a clear, sustained, and uniform musical note from end to end. You've essentially taken the iron for a second, more intensive spa treatment. Another exfoliating fire bath followed by another deep tissue hammer massage. It has emerged renewed. You have spent another day on what seems like a circular journey, but you now hold a bar of clean, trustworthy iron. The long, slow, patient work of purification is finally truly complete. Tomorrow, the art of shaping can begin. The new morning is greeted by a new kind of work. The days of purification are over. The iron bar resting beside your forge is clean, strong, and trustworthy. It is no longer a wild element to be tamed, but a refined material waiting to be given its final form. Today you will move from the brute science of metallurgy to the subtle art of geometry. Your task is to transform the still somewhat irregular bar into a perfectly straight and uniform square rod, the foundational shape for the twist that Kettle requested. You begin, as always, with the fire. You heat the first section of the bar, a length of about a handspan, to a bright, workable orange-yellow. You bring it to the anvil. Your goal now is precision. For the decorative twist to be even and beautiful, the bar itself must be geometrically perfect. Any deviation, any thick or thin spot, will show up as a flaw in the final pattern. You use your flat-faced hammer, the familiar weight a steady presence in your hand. The technique for forging a square bar is a fundamental skill, a mainstream practice for any smith, ancient or modern. You lay the hot section of the bar flat on the anvil and deliver a series of controlled overlapping hammer blows to create a smooth, flat surface. Then, you rotate the bar exactly 90 degrees and repeat the process on the adjacent side. You work these two sides until they are perfectly flat and at a right angle to each other, establishing the bar's thickness. Then you rotate again, working the third and fourth sides, constantly checking with your eye to ensure every corner is a crisp, sharp 90 degrees. It's the iron's geometry lesson, and you are the strict teacher. The only grade is pass or be hit with a hammer and put back in the fire. This work is slow and methodical. It is a dialogue of slight adjustments. A hammer blow lands a fraction too hard, and you must work the opposite side to correct it. A corner begins to round, and you must use light, targeted blows to sharpen it again. You work your way down the bar, section by section. Heat, hammer, rotate, check. Heat, hammer, rotate, check. The rhythm is hypnotic, a quiet meditation in steel and fire. A quirky, almost magical skill that a master smith develops is a preternaturally accurate eye. Without calipers or rulers, you rely on the precision of your own senses. You hold the bar up frequently, closing one eye and sighting down its length, looking for the slightest bend or twist. You feel its balance in your hands. You can spot a deviation of a millimeter from across the workshop. This practiced eye is your most valuable tool. Historians still argue about the level of precision that was common in the Viking Age. Some surviving artifacts show a regularity that seems almost machine-made, while others are rougher and more organic. Was the difference a matter of skill, of time, or simply of a different aesthetic, where perfect geometry wasn't the highest value? For this ring, a symbol of a new, well-ordered life, you are striving for the highest precision you can achieve. As the day wears on, the bar is transformed. The last of its lumpy, uneven character is hammered away. In its place is a long, elegant rod of dark iron, its four sides flat and smooth, its four corners sharp and clean. When you lay it on the flat face of the anvil and give it a push, it rolls like a perfect square, without a single wobble. The bar has finally reached its peak physical condition. After a long and arduous training montage, it has gone from a lumpy couch potato to a chiseled athlete, ready for the main event. All the preparatory labor, the bog, the smelt, the compactions, the welds, is now complete. The material is finally ready. Tomorrow you will introduce the first element of beauty, the first touch of art. Tomorrow you will twist it. Today the feeling in the smithy is different. The long, arduous labor of creating the material is behind you. Before you lies a perfect, uniform square rod of clean iron. The work is no longer about purification or brute force, but about art. Today, you will begin to give the iron the beauty and character that will transform it from a simple bar into a symbol of a man's new life. Before you light the fire, you take a piece of soapstone and carefully mark the rod. You are planning the design. Ketel asked for a simple twist, but simple does not mean artless. You decide on a classic balanced pattern, a long, elegant twisted section in the very center, flanked by two shorter plain sections, which will in turn be followed by two more, smaller twists near the ends. These marks are your map, the guides that will ensure the final piece is symmetrical and pleasing to the eye. The tools for this task are different. You will use your hammer very little. Instead, you will rely on a vise and a twisting wrench. Your vise is not a modern screw clamp, but a clever arrangement of heavy iron stakes driven deep into a massive oak stump near your anvil, creating a fork that can grip the bar with unyielding strength. The wrench is a block of steel with a perfectly square hole punched through its center. The hole an exact match for your rod. A long handle is forged to one side of the block, providing the leverage you will need. The key to a beautiful twist is precise heat control. You must heat only the section you intend to twist, and you must heat it evenly along its length. You build a smaller, more focused fire in your forge. You lay the bar across the coals, positioning it so that only the central marked-off section is absorbing the heat. You move it back and forth, turning it slowly, ensuring every side gets an equal share of the warmth. The correct temperature for twisting is a bright, even red heat, hot enough to be soft and plastic, but not so hot that the sharp square corners begin to melt and lose their definition. This is a delicate balance. When the color is perfect, a uniform, glowing red from one soapstone mark to the other, you move with swift purpose. You carry the bar to the stump vise and lock one end firmly into the iron fork. You slide the twisting wrench down the cool end of the bar until its square hole engages the rod, right at the edge of the heated section. Now, the quiet magic begins. You take the long handle of the wrench in both hands and apply a slow, smooth, and steady pressure. There is no sound of a hammer, no shower of sparks. There is only a deep, silent yielding as the iron begins to obey the force of the torque. It is like watching a muscle flex in slow motion. The four sharp corners of the rod begin to spiral, transforming from straight lines into a graceful, flowing helix. This is the iron's first yoga class, and you are its guide, helping it through a deep spinal twist. It's surprisingly flexible as long as it's properly warmed up. You count the rotations carefully. 1 full turn, 2, 3, 4. You watch the pattern tighten, the facets of the twist catching the light from the forge. You stop when the spiral looks tight and even, a perfect, repeating pattern. A quirky and wonderful tidbit is that this simple twist is a powerful symbol in your culture, representing the intertwined threads of fate, the unbreakable bonds of an oath, or the strength of a family. This simple pattern connects Ketil's ring to a whole universe of meaning. Once you are satisfied, you hold the bar steady and quench the newly twisted section in your slack tub. It enters the water with a furious hiss, a great cloud of steam erupting into the air. This cools it instantly, locking the twist in place and preventing the heat from spreading down the bar and ruining your clean, straight sections. You pull it out. The transformation is stunning. The central portion of the bar is now a beautiful, complex spiral, its dark, quenched surface highlighting the play of light on its many new facets. On either side, the bar remains a perfect, untouched square. The contrast is elegant and powerful. Historians still argue whether these twisted patterns were purely for decoration, or if they were also thought to add strength, like twisting fibers to make a rope. Looking at it now, you know it has added beauty. The bar is no longer just a bar. It has an identity. It's like it just got its first tattoo, a bold and intricate design right in its center. The first and most important decorative step is complete. The iron rod lies cooling near the anvil, its central portion now a thing of beauty, a captured spiral of dark, elegant iron. But the design is incomplete. A single twist is a statement. A pattern of 3 is a story. Your task now is to create the 2 smaller flanking twists, and the challenge is one of perfect, mirrored symmetry. This is a true test of a craftsman's consistency. You return the bar to the fire, but your focus is now on one of the side sections you marked out with soapstone, between the plain central part and what will become the end of the ring. Once again, you apply a careful, localized heat, coaxing the iron up to that same precise, bright red temperature. Too hot and the corners will blur. Too cold and the iron will resist, possibly even cracking under the strain. When the heat is perfect, you move back to the stump vise. You clamp the bar, perhaps cushioning the already finished central twist with blocks of wet wood to protect it from being marred. You fit the twisting wrench onto the bar at the start of the heated section. You take a deep breath. You begin to turn. This time you have a reference. You watch the new twist forming, comparing it to the central one. You want this one to be smaller, tighter, a complement to the main event. You apply the same steady pressure, the same slow rotation. It's like trying to get matching tattoos on both arms. The first one sets the precedent, and the second one is a nerve-wracking test of the artist's ability to replicate it. The iron can't complain if you mess it up, but you will know, and the imperfection will mock you forever. You make 2 full rotations and stop. It looks right. You quench it in the slack tub, the hiss of steam a satisfying punctuation mark on the work. You pull it out and inspect it. The twist is clean, tight, and the transition from the plain, square section is sharp. One side is done. Now for the true test. You must create its identical twin on the other side of the bar. You heat the final marked section, paying even closer attention to the color, striving to match the temperature of the previous heats exactly. You clamp the bar, position the wrench, and begin the third and final twist. All your focus is on repeating your previous actions perfectly. The same amount of pressure, the same speed of rotation, the exact same number of turns, 2 full rotations, and not a fraction more. This ability to create clean, symmetrical, repeating patterns is a hallmark of the era's metalwork. It's a mainstream historical fact that these twisted motifs are found on countless artifacts, from the humble to the magnificent. The skill to produce them was a clear sign of a master craftsman. You finish the final twist and quench it. Now, you can hold up the entire bar and inspect the finished pattern. It is balanced, a long, bold twist in the center, flanked by 2 restful, plain sections, which are then finished by 2 smaller, identical twists on the ends. You sight down its length. All 3 twisted sections spiral in the same direction, a continuous flowing line of energy. The symmetry holds. Historians still argue whether smiths of this time used hidden aids, cleverly marked tools, jigs, or stoppers, to achieve such flawless repetition, or if it was purely a matter of a master's practiced eye and muscle memory. Looking at the bar in your hands, you know the answer for this piece. It was born of your own quiet, focused intention. The decorative work on the body of the bar is now complete. It is no longer a simple rod. It is a patterned object imbued with a balanced and deliberate beauty. You've successfully avoided making the iron look like it got dressed in the dark. All its patterns are facing the right way, a quiet victory in itself. The next step is to shape the ends and bring it all together in a circle. With the intricate twists locked into the iron, your attention now moves to the ends of the bar. The final object will be a circle, and the way the ends meet and clasp is of great importance. A simple, squared-off end would be abrupt and crude. The transition from the patterned body of the ring to its clasp requires a touch of grace. Today you will forge the tapers. Your goal is to take the last handspan of the square rod at each end and transform it into a smooth, round, and gently tapering point. This elegance is a subtle but essential detail, allowing the form of the ring to flow naturally into its terminals. You begin by heating the very end of the rod, concentrating the forge's heat on the last few inches. You bring it to a bright orange-yellow, the perfect temperature for fluid-controlled shaping. On the anvil, the work begins not with heavy blows, but with quick, light, and precise ones. This is a fundamental blacksmithing technique, the creation of a taper. First, you use your hammer to knock down the 4 sharp corners of the square rod, quickly forging it into a rough octagon. Then the true skill begins. You start hammering with a light, rapid staccato of blows, and at the same time you begin to rotate the rod with your tongs. Hammer and rotate in a constant, fluid motion. The combination of the light blows and the continuous rotation prevents you from forging new flat spots. Instead, the metal is squeezed evenly from all sides, stretching outwards, the diameter shrinking as the length extends. The square cross-section melts away into a smooth, round cone under the persuasion of your hammer. This is the iron's finishing school lesson. After all the brute force of its creation, it is now learning poise and elegance. You are teaching it not to be so aggressively square. The sound is a fast, light ringing, a delicate music compared to the heavy beat of the earlier work. You are using a lighter hammer, its face polished smooth so as not to mar the surface of the iron. You watch the taper grow, extending from the end of the final twist like a gentle exhale. There is a subtle, organic quality to a hand-forged taper. A quirky tidbit of the craft being that it never has the cold, mathematical perfection of a machined cone. It has a certain life to it, a flowing line that is the unique and inimitable signature of its maker's hands. When you are satisfied with the length and grace of the first taper, you must create its twin. This is the familiar challenge of symmetry. You heat the opposite end of the rod to the same bright temperature. At the anvil, you use the first taper as your visual guide. You consciously replicate the rhythm of your hammer, the speed of your rotation, the weight of your blows. You work until you have a near-perfect mirror image, another round, smooth taper flowing from the other end of the bar. Historians still argue about the meaning behind the different terminal designs found on ancient neck rings. Whether zoomorphic heads of wolves or ravens were reserved for chieftains while simpler forms were for the common folk, or if it was all just a matter of regional fashion. For Catel's ring, you know that a simple, honest clasp is what is needed, and these two elegant tapers are the perfect foundation for it. You hold up the bar. The work of the day is done. The object in your hands now has a clear and beautiful flow. The central twist provides the bold heart, the smaller side twists add rhythm, and now the two graceful tapers give the piece a sense of direction and finality. The bar now has elegantly pointed shoes, ready for the next step of its journey. All that remains is to teach it how to hold hands with itself. The long iron bar with its patterned body and gracefully tapered ends is now ready for the detail that will make it functional. Today, you will forge the clasp. For a man like Catel, a simple and strong design is best. Nothing ostentatious, nothing complicated. You will create two small interlocking hooks, one at each end, that will form a humble but secure closure. You begin by heating the very tip of one of the tapered ends. The heat must be precise, concentrated only on the last inch or two. You bring it to a soft, pliable reddish-orange heat. This is not work for heavy blows, but for gentle persuasion. You bring the glowing tip to the anvil. Your anvil is a large square block, but it has one rounded edge, a bick, specifically for this kind of bending work. You lay the hot tapered point across this curve, and with a light hammer you begin to tap. The blows are not directed downwards, but at an angle, gently coaxing the very end of the rod to begin curling back on itself. It's a slow, delicate process. You are not beating the iron into submission. You are convincing it to bend. After all the violence of its creation, this stage feels more like calligraphy than blacksmithing, as if you are teaching the iron to sign its own initial in a graceful, cursive script. As the curve begins to form, you refine it, using the rounded bick and light taps to create a smooth, even arc. The final shape is a simple, understated hook, flowing organically from the end of the taper. As a small personal touch, a quirky habit that acts as a silent signature, you give the very tip of the hook a single, firm tap with the flat of your hammer, creating a small paddle-like flare. It's a detail no one else will ever notice, but you will know it is the mark of your hands. Now comes the familiar test. You must create a perfect mirror image on the opposite end. You heat the other tapered tip to the same precise temperature. At the anvil, you begin to form the second hook. This time, however, you must bend it in the opposite direction so that the two can interlock. You work with intense concentration, constantly pausing to visually compare the new curve with the first one. Are they the same size? Is the opening of the hook the same width? Is the curve just as graceful? This simple hook and loop clasp is a mainstream historical design found on countless surviving Viking Age rings. While chieftains might have sported rings with complex locking mechanisms or elaborate stylized animal heads that bit onto each other, this functional and robust method was the everyday solution. It was strong, secure, and easy for the wearer to fasten or unfasten on their own. You finish the second hook, giving its tip the same subtle flare as the first. The work is done. You hold up the long, straight bar. At either end, a perfect mirrored hook curls back, ready to connect. You can bring the two ends close together, seeing how they will neatly interlock, one S-curve cradling the other. Historians still argue whether the way such hooks were worn, facing up, down, or to the side, held any particular symbolic weight, or if it was just a matter of comfort. You don't concern yourself with such things. You only know that you have forged a good, clean clasp. The iron bar is now, for all intents and purposes, a finished neck ring that has been unrolled and laid out flat. The twists provide the beauty, the tapers provide the grace, and the hooks provide the function. You've essentially created the world's most elegant, overqualified barbecue skewer. The final, and most transformative act, awaits. The object on your anvil is a paradox. It is a finished thing with all its patterns, tapers, and hooks in place, and yet, it is not what it is meant to be. It is a straight line yearning to become a circle. Today, you will fulfill its destiny. This is perhaps the most nerve-wracking part of the entire process. A single misplaced hammer blow, a moment of inattention, and days of meticulous work could be ruined. the beautiful twists flattened or the entire bar bent into an awkward, clumsy shape. Your partner in this task will be the horn of your anvil. This is the thick conical spike that tapers out from the main block of the anvil, its surface smooth and rounded. It is the perfect form around which you will bend the great circle. To bend the bar into an even curve, you must heat it evenly along its entire length. This is a challenge in a forge designed for localized heating. You must become a patient cook, turning and feeding the long bar through the fire's heart, moving it back and forth slowly and constantly from one hooked end to the other. You are not aiming for a brilliant forging heat. A lower, more gentle, deep cherry red is what you need. A heat that makes the iron soft and compliant, but is not so hot as to risk damaging the delicate, sharp edges of the twists. When the entire bar is glowing with a uniform, even red, you move with deliberate speed to the anvil. You lay the very center of the bar across the thickest part of the horn. You take your hammer and begin. The blows are not heavy and direct, which would flatten the bar. They are glancing, angled blows, striking the sides of the bar, coaxing and pushing it to wrap around the anvil horn's curve. The iron, which has been so stubborn, finally has to bend to your will, literally. Slowly, the center of the bar begins to curve. You move the bar, working your way from the middle towards one end, continuing the process of gentle, persuasive hammering. The straight line gives way to a shallow arc, which deepens into a C shape. The sound is a series of dull, solid thuds, the sound of soft iron being sculpted. The metal groans softly under the tension. This act is heavy with symbolism. A quirky, deeply felt truth is that in closing this circle you are doing more than shaping metal. You are physically forging a symbol of wholeness, of eternity, of an oath. This ring will represent the freedman's new, complete life. And here, you are creating the form for that very concept. The work is too much for a single heat. As the iron cools and stiffens, you place the large, curved shape back into the forge, reheating it to continue the bend. Historians still argue about the precise methods used to form such large, perfect circles without the aid of modern machined mandrels. Some suggest shaped wooden formers were used, while others insist it was all done by the mastersmith, SI and skill on the anvil horn. With the second heat, you bring the ends of the bar around. The two hooks you so carefully forged now curve towards each other, the space between them shrinking with every blow. You work slowly now with extreme care, ensuring the final shape is a circle, not an oval or an egg. By the end of the work, you have it. The long, straight rod is gone. In its place is a heavy, open circle of dark, patterned iron. The two hooks hover a few inches apart, their mirrored curves ready to meet. It is not yet a perfect true circle, but the great transformation is done. The spear has become a halo, a heavy, rustic halo that would certainly give an angel a headache, but a halo nonetheless. The line is now a loop, and the ring is almost ready to be worn. The object in your hands is now unmistakably a neck ring. It is a heavy, dark circle of iron. The great transformative work of bending is complete, but the violence of that work has left its mark. The circle is not yet true. It is slightly lopsided, with a few subtle flat spots where the hammer fell, and other areas where the curve is a little too pronounced. Today is a day of quiet correction. It is the gentle art of truing the circle. This is a process of patience, not of power. You put your heavy hammer aside. For much of this work, you will use a mallet made of dense, heavy wood, or one with a head of stitched, raw leather. These softer tools can move the metal, nudging it into place without marring the surface with fresh hammer marks. Your most important tool, however, is your eye. You hold the ring up, letting it hang from your hand. You rotate it slowly, watching the silhouette against the light from the door. You are looking for the imperfections, the places where the curve is not a perfect, continuous arc. With a sliver of soapstone, you make small, discrete marks on the high spots and the flat spots. This is your roadmap for today's journey. You begin the work cold. You place the ring over the horn of the anvil, finding a section where the curve is too tight. You tap the inside of the ring with your wooden mallet. The sound is a soft, deep thud, a gentle percussive whisper compared to the ringing song of hot forging. You tap, rotate the ring, and tap again, slowly encouraging the tight spot to relax into a wider curve. Then you find a flat spot. You lay it on the anvil's face and tap gently on either side of the flatness, bringing the curve back into that section. Tap, sight, adjust, tap, sight, adjust. This is the rhythm of the work. It's the most tedious part of the process, a quiet battle of millimeters. It's a bit like trying to shape a perfectly round pizza dough. You fix a flat spot on one side, and suddenly you notice the other side has gone slightly oblong. For a few stubborn spots, a little heat is required. You don't bring the whole ring to a forging temperature. You carefully heat just the offending section to a dull, barely visible red. This is just enough to make the iron compliant. You bring it back to the anvil and use the mallet again. The warm iron yields more easily to the soft blows, like a stiff muscle relaxing under a gentle massage. A quirky but important aspect of the craft is the feel of a balanced piece. As the ring gets closer to a true circle, it begins to feel different in your hands. It feels less like a clumsy, heavy object and more like a complete, balanced thing. Its weight feels evenly distributed. This sense of balance is something only the maker can truly feel. This is a testament to the skill of ancient smiths, a mainstream historical fact that the near-perfect circularity of many surviving torcs was achieved entirely by this painstaking process of sighting and adjusting by hand. During this process, you also check the alignment of the hooks. You ensure they meet perfectly, without overlapping or twisting, and that the gap between them is just right. Historians still argue whether these rings were custom-fitted to an individual S-neck or made in standard sizes. You have made this to a common size, knowing that the new owner can slightly open or close it for a perfect fit. After what feels like an eternity of tiny, incremental changes, you hold it up one last time. The curve is now a single, graceful, uninterrupted circle. It hangs with a satisfying sense of weight and balance. It is true. The ring has finally passed its posture check and is sitting up straight. The construction is, at last, truly finished. But its surface is still the rough, black, scaly skin of the forge. It is a finished form, but it is not yet beautiful. Before its debut, it needs one final trip to the spa for a long, deep cleaning. The neck ring is complete in its form, a perfect, heavy circle of iron, but its soul is still hidden. Its long and violent journey through the fire has left it with a dark, rough skin. This is fire scale, a hard, brittle crust of black iron oxide that formed every time the metal was heated. This scale obscures the fine details of your work, hiding the sharp facets of the twists under a dull, lumpy blanket. Today is a day of revelation. Today, you will polish the ring. There are no machines for this work, no modern sandpaper or polishing wheels. Your tools are simple, patient, and natural. You have a bowl of coarse sand, another of fine sand, a thick scrap of well-worn leather, and a pail of water. The work is one of pure, manual effort. You take the ring and a handful of the coarse sand, adding a little water to make a gritty paste. You wrap the leather scrap around your fingers, scoop up some of the paste, and begin to rub. The sound is a harsh grating scrape, a rhythmic shush-shush-shush as the hard grains of sand grind against the even harder scale. This is a mainstream and ancient method of finishing metal, a slow battle of attrition between abrasive and oxide. You work your way around the entire circle, your arm muscles quickly beginning to burn with the effort. This is the iron's exfoliation treatment, a very aggressive and noisy facial designed to scrub away the years, or in this case the fiery days, of accumulated grime. Slowly, painstakingly, you begin to see a change. The dull, lifeless black begins to give way to a brighter, silvery gray of the raw iron beneath. The true reward for this labor is seeing your own work emerge from the darkness. The beautiful sharp edges of the twisted sections, which had been softened and blurred by the scale, become crisp and clear once more. The play of light and shadow in the valleys and peaks of the helix pattern, the very soul of the design, is revealed. It is as if you are freeing the ring's true form from a dark prison. Once you have removed the heavy scale with the coarse sand, you switch to the finer grit. The process is the same, but the sound changes to a softer, higher-pitched hiss. The goal now is not to remove scale, but to remove the scratches left by the first pass, smoothing the surface of the metal into a clean, uniform finish. A quirky but important detail of the era's aesthetic is that the goal was likely not a perfect, mirror-like shine. The desired finish was a soft, satin luster, a deep glow that spoke of the metal's inner character, not a brilliant reflection. You work for hours, the repetitive motion becoming a meditation. You feel the surface of the iron changing under your fingers, from rough and gritty to smooth and cool. For the final buff, you use a piece of soft wool fleece and a paste made from fine wood ash and oil. You rub the ring vigorously, and a deep soft gleam comes to the surface of the iron. Historians still argue about how extensively such everyday iron items were finished. Perhaps a simple ring would have been left with its dark forge finish to be polished slowly over years of wear and handling. But your pride as a craftsman demands that you deliver a piece that is as beautiful as you can make it. Finally, you wipe the ring clean. The transformation is breathtaking. The object you hold is no longer a piece of rough hardware. It is jewelry. The polished high points of the twists gleam in the light, providing a stunning contrast to the dark, untouched crevices. The tapered ends and simple hooks shine with a soft, metallic light. It is beautiful to the eye, and cool and smooth to the touch. It is finally ready for its close-up. All that is left is to give it a final coat to protect it from the world. The neck ring is pristine, its polished surface gleaming with a cool gray light. It is beautiful, but it is vulnerable. Iron is a child of fire, but its greatest enemy is water, and even the dampness in the air will eventually seek to turn its smooth surface back into a crust of red rust. Your final task as its maker is to give it a shield, a protective skin to guard it against the world. You will not use paint or lacquer. Your method is an ancient and honest one, a mainstream technique for protecting fine ironwork. You will give it a hot wax finish. When the iron is warmed, its very pores seem to open, allowing melted wax to seep in, and create a durable, water-resistant seal that also enriches the metal's color, deepening it to a lustrous black. Your material for this is a simple, beautiful thing: a round cake of golden beeswax, a gift from a beekeeper in exchange for a new hive tool. You hold it in your palm, its surface smooth, its weight pleasing. It smells faintly of honey and sunshine and 1,000 flowers, a scent completely alien to this workshop of smoke and steel. This final heating must be one of gentleness and care. To thrust the ring back into the forge's heart would be to ruin the polish and raise a new skin of fire scale. Instead, you hold the ring with a clean pair of tongs and hover it high above the glowing bed of charcoal. You are not forging, but toasting, letting the radiant warmth soak into the metal. The ring needs to be just hot enough to melt the wax on contact, a temperature you can judge by instinct or by letting a single drop of water fall onto it. When the water drop sizzles and vanishes in an instant, the iron is ready. You take the warm ring to a clean space on your workbench. You pick up the cake of beeswax, and you rub it across the warm surface of the iron. The effect is immediate and wonderful. The solid wax melts into a clear, liquid sheen, flowing across the metal and into every tiny crevice of the twisted patterns. The air, which has for days smelled of coal smoke and hot metal, is now filled with the warm, sweet, comforting perfume of melting honey and wax. Your smoky workshop for a moment smells like a fancy candlemaker's stall at the market. It's a welcome change. As you rub the wax over the entire surface, you can see the color of the iron transform. The silvery, polished highlights deepen to a rich, semi-gloss black, while the shadowed valleys of the twist become even darker. The contrast is heightened, making the pattern leap out with a new and dramatic energy. You take a clean, soft scrap of linen and gently wipe away the excess, buffing the surface to a deep, satisfying luster. A quirky, pleasant fact is that the scent of warm iron and beeswax, was the traditional smell of new, well-made things. It was the scent of a tool that would last, of a job well and truly finished. Historians still argue about the exact recipes for these ancient finishes, whether simple beeswax was the standard, or if smiths had secret formulas of oils and resins. But this simple, honest finish feels right for this simple, honest ring. The ring is now complete, perfect in form, beautiful in finish, and sealed against the damp. You hang it on a wooden peg on the wall to cool completely, to let the wax cure and harden into its final protective skin. Your work as the smith is done. The long, winding journey from a rusty lump of bog mud to this gleaming symbol of freedom is over. You can now clean your tools and bank the fire with the quiet, profound satisfaction that only comes from having made something with your own two hands. All that is left is for Kettle to arrive. A few days pass. The neck ring hangs on its peg, a silent, dark circle against the wooden wall of your smithy. Its presence is a quiet conclusion to a long story of fire, sweat, and patience. You go about your other tasks, mending a cauldron, forging a set of hinges, the rhythm of your daily work a familiar comfort, but your eyes are often drawn to the ring, waiting for the final chapter of its creation to unfold. It happens in the late afternoon, when the sun is low, and the light in your workshop is soft and golden. Kettle, the freedman, appears at your door just as he did before, quietly, respectfully. He carries a small, well-made wooden cask on his shoulder. He has come for his ring. There is a simple gravity to the moment. You wipe your hands on a clean rag, walk to the wall, and gently lift the ring from its peg. You give it one final polish with a piece of soft wool, and the dark waxed iron gleams with a deep, subtle luster. You turn and hold it out to him. Kettle looks at it, and for a long moment he is completely still. He sees not just a ring, but the culmination of a promise. He sees the deep, rich black of the iron, the way the light catches on the sharp, polished facets of the three twisted sections. He sees the perfect symmetry, the graceful flow of the tapers into the simple, honest hooks of the clasp. He reaches out and takes it from you. The moment his fingers close around the iron, you see a change in his expression. He feels the coolness of the metal, the surprising smoothness of the finish. But most of all, he feels its weight. This is the weight of freedom, a tangible, undeniable heaviness in his hands. It is not the burdensome weight of a chain, but the solid, reassuring weight of an anchor. It is real. It is substantial. He has worked for this. He has earned this. This heft is the physical proof of his new life. A mainstream historical fact is that neck rings, or torcs, were profound symbols of status and identity in the Viking world. To wear one, regardless of the material, was to declare your place in the social order. For a freedman, to go from the bare neck of a thrall to wearing a ring like this was a public and powerful transformation. Kettle places the small cask of fine, dark ale on your workbench, the final payment for your work. The transaction is sealed not with a handshake, but with a simple shared nod of mutual respect. Then he prepares to put the ring on. He carefully takes the two hooked ends and gently pries them apart just enough to fit over his head. He ducks his head and settles the heavy iron circle onto his shoulders. It rests on his collarbones with a satisfying weight. He reaches down and carefully squeezes the ends back together, interlocking the two simple hooks at the base of his throat. In a world without widespread literacy, a quirky but vital truth is that such visible symbols were more potent than any written contract. This ring is now his passport, his letter of introduction, his proof of standing, all forged into a single wearable object. Historians still argue whether the value of such an item lay in the material itself or in the craftsmanship and symbolism. Watching the quiet pride on Kettle's face, you know that the meaning forged into this ring is worth far more than its weight in iron. He adjusts the ring, his calloused fingers tracing the lines of the twists. He looks at you, and though he says little, his eyes convey a profound gratitude. He stands a little taller now, his head held a little higher. He is no longer just Kettle. He is Kettle, a free man, who wears the sign of his freedom for all the world to see. He gives you one last nod, turns, and walks out of your smithy and into the evening light. The peg on the wall is now empty. The customer is satisfied. Your job is done. It is a strange, quiet feeling, like watching a boat you built sail off over the horizon. You have done all you can. The ring and the man are now on their own journey. You stand alone in the growing twilight of your workshop. The air is still and quiet. Kettle is long gone, taking the ring and its story with him out into the world. The cask of ale, his payment, sits dark and cool in the corner. On the wall, The wooden peg where the neck ring hung for the last few days is empty, a small blank space in the room's memory. The project that has consumed your time, your energy, and your focus for weeks is now complete. A long journey, from the misty bog to the fiery heart of the forge, has reached its end. The conclusion of a large project is always followed by the same quiet ritual, setting the workshop to rights. It is a calming, meditative process, a way to close the day and bring order to the creative chaos of your work. You move through the cooling smithy, your movements slow and deliberate. You take the hammers you used today, the light one for the hooks, the wooden mallet for the truing, and hang them in their proper places on the wall rack. You gather the tongs, their jaws still holding a faint warmth, and return them to their hooks. The twisting wrench, the hardy tools, the soapstone marker, all are wiped clean and put away. You take a broom made of birch twigs and sweep the hard-packed earthen floor around the anvil. You gather the little piles of black fire scale, the dust of the day's labor, and add them to a waste bucket. The role of the smith was a vital one in any community. A mainstream historical fact is that you were the master technician responsible for the tools that produced food, the nails that built homes, and the weapons that provided defense. A village with a good smith was a village that thrived. Finally, you turn your attention to the forge. The fire has burned down to a deep, glowing bed of embers, a sleepy red heart in the gray ash. You do not extinguish it completely. With a small iron rake, you gently push all the glowing coals together into a tight, compact mound. Then you cover this mound with a thick blanket of old ash and fine charcoal dust, insulating it from the air. Banked like this, the fire will not go out. It will smolder through the night, a tiny sleeping volcano, its heat preserved. In the morning, a few breaths from the bellows will be all that is needed to wake it again. The light has almost completely faded now. The only illumination comes from the faint, pulsing glow of the embers beneath their ashen blanket. The workshop is filled with a deep and profound silence, broken only by the occasional soft tink of a cooling tool contracting. The sharp, acrid smell of hot steel is gone, replaced by the gentle, lingering scent of beeswax and old smoke. Some say the craft is a kind of magic, a quirky belief that persists because you can, after all, turn stone into metal. And tonight it does feel a little like magic. Historians still argue about the social standing of a smith, whether you were a wealthy, revered artisan or a soot-stained laborer. Standing here now in the quiet of your own domain, you feel neither. You simply feel the deep, bone-weary satisfaction of a job well done. You look at the sleeping fire one last time, then turn and pull the heavy wooden door closed, leaving the smithy to its well-earned rest in the darkness. And so our story, the quiet forging of a simple iron ring, now comes to a gentle and peaceful close. The long days of patient work are done, the fires are banked, and the tools are all at rest in the cool and settling darkness of the smithy. That feeling of quiet satisfaction can now be yours as well, as you let the last of these images fade away like the final glowing embers of a fire being covered for the night. There is no more work to be done, no more hammering to listen for, only the deep and profound silence of a job now complete. Let that peaceful stillness settle over you now, a soft and heavy blanket to help you on your own journey into rest. Allow your thoughts to drift away as easily and as quietly as the last wisp of smoke rising from a chimney against the deep, dark velvet of the night sky. Just relax and let the quiet carry you down into a deep and untroubled sleep. There is nothing left to do now but to rest.